Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think everyone has streamed in so far. I think we'll probably get some more stragglers joining us in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, I will begin. My name is Brian Kwan Wood, and I'm the Director of Research here at SVA's MA Curatorial Practice program. On behalf of the chair, Stephen Henry Madoff, and myself, I'd like to welcome all of you to the discussion we are about to have here today, the presentations from the Queen's Museum on their quite epic Year of Uncertainty project. This year, the Queen's Museum is embracing the intolerable uncertainty of our time by embarking on a process of institutional self-exploration, while strengthening connections between the museum and its communities to create new possibilities for culture, kinship, and mutual support. I think the big question really with the Year of Uncertainty project is how a new kind of institution can embrace the unknown, but also how a museum on a scale as large as the Queen's Museum can also render itself open and vulnerable both to itself and to its community, right? So it's really a quite profound and large-scale experiment, as I understand it. But I think you will learn more from the Queen's Museum itself. It's my great pleasure to welcome Catherine Grau, who's a public programs manager at the Queen's Museum, Kimaada Le Gendre, who is the director of education at the Queen's Museum, Julian Louis Phillips, who is artist in residence in the Year of Uncertainty project, and of course Sally Tallant, who is the Queen's Museum's president and executive director. And with that, maybe before I pass it over to Sally, I'll just mention, so you know, this meeting is being recorded. And after 45 past or so, we can open everything to questions from the audience. I would ask that you just type your questions into the chat feature, and I'll send everyone a little notice when it's time to do that. And just try to keep your microphones on mute. If you do happen to unmute yourself, it's fine, but you may be recorded, sealed into the recording forever. And that's all. Sally, take it away. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Now let me just check. Am I muted? Wait. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Great. All right. So thank you so much, Brian, for inviting us to speak together about this and this endeavor, this project, this kind of undertaking that we've begun at the Queen's Museum. I see amongst some of the participants, some colleagues, some of your students who very kindly and gallantly worked with us, so they have insights as well to the work that we're trying to do. I wanted to share just a few images. We're not going to use slides throughout, but I wanted to locate a little where we are. So for those of you who haven't been to the Queen's Museum, this is the picture of our facade. We're a building that was built first for the 1939 World's Fair, then used again for the 1964 World's Fair, and with the site of the UN General Assembly in between times. We're in the center of the park. You can see here we're in the center of Flushing Meadows Corona Park, and the reason I use this slide is to really demonstrate that most of the transport infrastructure in New York is about flowing people into Manhattan, but we're here in Queens, and so we have the privilege actually of being apart from the center, which enables us, I think, to take risks and to do things that maybe would be more difficult to do if we were embedded in the center of Manhattan. But Queens itself has a population of 2.4 million people, and the majority of that population speak a language other than English at home. It's the most ethnically diverse urban area in the United States, and that's the context that we begin from. So I just wanted to give you that kind of locator before we began. The Year of Uncertainty came out of two things. One, we were reimagining that's the team working together to really think about, like, what can a museum be and how can it be defined through and by conversations with its communities, and how can it find a way of working that both supports artists, supports our neighbours, engages with our neighbourhoods, and finds its place as not apart from, but as a part of the social context in which we exist. And we were doing this work and thinking together and trying to make plans for the future when last year, well, 18 months ago, or however long ago it is now, I've lost track of time, when the pandemic really hit hard, and hit particularly hard in Queens. And we'd already started to think about issues that we could focus on, and they included the issues that we've put at the heart of the year of uncertainty, so care, repair, play, justice, and the future. And we came to those through many conversations where we were trying to find prompts that were broad enough and open enough to find multiple entry points and ways in which we could use them to think about what a museum might become. Having really began adjusting, and my colleagues will talk more about this, to the realities of operating during a pandemic, we realized with some kind of horror that the uncertainty that we were beginning to navigate was going to continue and will continue. And we know that to be true, all of us now. You know, we're still doing, this talk was supposed to be in person, and we're doing it on Zoom because of the uncertainty around the pandemic, which continues. So we wanted to find a mechanism by which we could embrace the uncertainty and use it to create space and time, and to share our resources with artists and communities to rethink the museum. And we kind of came up with a structure where we invited artists, co-thinkers, and community partners into the organization to work together with our staff to really try and use the time, use the studios, use the galleries, use the period of time that we have to really think about what a museum might become, and to hopefully lay the foundations for the future of our work. So this isn't a project that begins and ends, but really it hopefully lays some foundations for the future. And we're in the first phase of that program now. We've put it into 3 phases, when we're in participate and build. So if you visit the museum now, which we urge you to do, there's plenty going on there. There are exhibitions, there is work in all of the galleries, but it's continuing to evolve and it's iterative. And there's many programs happening. And I think today's presentation, I hope we can find a way to talk about some of the challenges we're navigating, because it's interesting to build something like this and to enter into something which is iterative and discursive and opening up questions, and actually hopefully is sharing resources together with our communities and artists, but that is trying to create space and some of the learning that we're all also doing, which where we're learning that actually we are probably doing too much. Like, we've made it incredibly complicated. I'll leave Catherine and Julian and Kimaada to comment this in a bit more depth, but I think it's interesting for us to try and be really open about the challenges we're navigating. So, you know, because we opened up an experimental process, what comes out of that is really, you can't predict it and is unexpected. So we are literally in the moment right now where we're trying to work out what to do with the next 3 months ahead of us. The images I'm showing you now are from the intensive, which was when we tried to get everybody together only a few weeks ago now, and we did manage, and there's Mason and Lynn navigating the realities of a hybrid, part in person, part remote participation. And really, I think it would have been amazing if we could have done this right at the beginning, but it just wasn't possible. And so, you know, having to accept some of the realities of living through this moment is also a part of what we're learning. So I'm just showing you these images. We've also, this was a beautiful day, and this is us actually experiencing things together. And I think that talking together is one way of being, but I also think that doing things together is as valuable, and eating together is also as valuable. And these images just give you a sense of some of the ways in which we've been gathering in smaller groups. But I'm going to hand over now to Julian, who accepted very gallantly the invitation to be an artist in residence in this program. And what that means is that he receives studio space and some support to participate in our programming and also to make exhibitions. But Julian, I wondered if I could hand over to you, and I can navigate the slides for you because I think I've got control of them. You just tell me when you want them to change. But I have a question. I wanted to ask you if you could talk about how you've been involved in conversations about the project and the opportunities for collaboration that this time has offered you, and you know, just what your experience has been. I think would be great for people to hear a little bit about.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks everyone at the Queen's Museum for doing this. Looking at these images, it is a reminder of how sort of experimental this process is. And to sort of answer your question, I'll begin with like this slide right here. This is a shot from the social justice teen summer camp, Queen's Teen Summer Camp, that was able to coordinate with Kimaada and the fabulous education team, where the idea was to sort of bring high school age youth into the museum, into sort of like my thought processes, and talk about subjects around abolition, right? Around decolonization, around the end of the carceral state. And when I applied to the Year of Uncertainty, it was an idea that I had, that if we're going to communicate and educate people around abolition, the folks who need to be doing that are the youth, and are the people who will be living immediately in this world that we're trying to build. That being said, this whole thing, and Sally and Kimaada and Catherine both know this, was a big experimentation, was a big experiment saying, okay, how do we take the format of like this art, social justice summer camp and really inundate it with heavy and precise subject matter that we don't really interact with every day, right? So immediately after our second day, I remember sitting down with Kimaada and we're like, this is a lot. We have to like slow it down. We really have to sort of figure out how to pay attention. I had all these sort of like plans each day. We're going to do this. We're going to talk about this type of protest. We're going to talk about this type of decolonial thinking, blah, 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 blah. But we just really focused on protest and what that really means, and what does it mean to embody resistance. I think, and this goes to sort of collaboration in general, wherever your community is, right? The community that you're working with, in this case, it's a bunch of high school age young people who actually, it was some of their first time at Queen's Museum and their first time in the program Queen's Teens. Getting them to sort of open up about some of the subject matter and really dig deep, that was the job in and of itself, right? And an artist who works with people, who tries to engage people, is we have like these big ideas, we have these things where we want to go, but it's always like, okay, we have this workshop, people come, where are we going to go together? That was an amazing experience. It is also, to answer that sort of second part of the question, the having an institution to sort of readily work with that has space, that has resources, that has a name where people can sort of say like, okay, I'm going to the Queen's Museum to do this thing. That's priceless compared to me putting up posters and like inviting people to talk about ending the police, right? And then, so I'll pivot because the next slide shows sort of us installing the exhibition that's up now. My work is heavily, it's very much rooted in my identity, it's rooted in my identity and experience as a Black man in America. But it is also, in a sort of macro sense, also looking at the capitalist structures that create the environment for racism, for police brutality, for colonization, for imperialization, and tries to sort of take the actual physical structures of those systems and play against them. So these, what we see on the screen are, you've seen them around the city, they're concrete barricades that are placed in various sites. They're all around Flushing Meadows Corona Park. And they're basically placed there to control the movement of people. And immediately, as I was thinking about what to do at the museum, talking about this subject matter, Queen's Museum, folks in production and curatorial helped me figure out how to fabricate these 2-scale barricades that are plush and movable with 2 people basically, and they're staying in the museum space, and we're going to be adding some throughout the exhibition, throughout the different parts of the museum. But these 2 things relate because here we have these objects that are here to sort of represent a in-between place that we're moving to as a society, right? Where we still have the presence of the police, but we're imagining a time where they will not exist. And it also is inviting people to practice the embodying of that resistance. So this picture's from install days. Right now, these same barricades are moved, they're changed, and they also have a lot of sort of quote unquote graffiti or just facing from the public. This past Saturday, I was at the museum hanging out with artists and folks coming in, and people were like, we want to write on these things. We want to like activate them this way. And then like immediately people saw the connection between this thing that represents this omnipotent force and this opportunity to change or voice frustrations against that same force. And it's interesting in my practice how the studio and the public sort of programming ebb and flow into one another and continue to sort of inform one another, but don't necessarily have to operate tangentially, if that makes sense. But a situation like this has been ripe for that ebbing and flowing to happen.
Thanks, Julian. I was going to skip to you, Kimaada. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the integrated way that we're working across departments and the way that the year of uncertainty has kind of maybe changed how the education department is working with the artists that are centered in the program. Yeah, and we have some slides I can change if you just tell me when you want to, or I can just go through whilst you're speaking.
You could just go through.
Okay.
So thank you. And I wanted Julian to kind of go before me because it just laid the foundation on talking about this way that we are working going forward. And, you know, Julian spoke about the fact that he curated this amazing art and social justice summer camp for our young people. And just the idea of how that came about was directly from our community. It was directly from our young people last year, you know, when they saw all this violence unfolding, when George Floyd was murdered, when the uprisings happened, you know, they looked to us, you know, as a community, as many of them call the Queens Museum a second home. They looked to us to provide a bit more support, a bit more knowledge around some of these topics. And the first Art and Social Justice Camp took place last year, and that was virtual. And this year, we were so happy to welcome young people back on site. And Julian, you know, gladly accepted curating this experience. And one of the things about the youth program that's so great is the fact that these artists in residence are also deeply embedded in our education programs. So they're working with our young people, they're working with our youth, they're working with our families. And some of these slides here that that's kind of going across the screen are showing another initiative that we had that shows how we're working kind of cross departments. And that's our U Community Summer Camp that we had this year. It was a multilingual, all abilities free camp for 64 families, local families in our Queens Corona Elmhurst community. Many of these families attend our family programs on the weekends, but they also attend our cultural food pantry. And some of their, you know, the parents are volunteers at the cultural food pantry. And so we wanted a way to celebrate the fact that, you know, we're excited to get people back on site, right? It was the summertime, the kids were zoomed out and they were ready to be back in person. And so we were able to curate this experience for 64 families by inviting artists to curate workshops. So we had a variety of different workshops. You see in this picture here, we had a little protest going on as the campers were looking out at the panorama. We had some community partners who also took part in building and developing workshops. And so it was a way to really embrace community in all ways and to truly center community, like bringing it on site. This was happening, you know, for 2 weeks, and it was loud and it was beautiful and it was energetic. And while people were going around looking at the other exhibits, like the campers were very much a force. And so that was a collaborative effort to lift. It was not just the education department. Curatorial had to be involved. Our community partners, public programs, our community organizer, and that is just shaping the way that we're developing education programs going forward. We have working groups where all different voices from the different departments are part of, and they're helping to develop and create and execute our education programs. And we see this as basically how it's going to be going forward. I am on a curatorial team with the exhibitions department as they're planning their next exhibitions that are going to be shown in the gallery. And one of the things we wanted to embrace is the fact that the same artists that work in our schools and have the privilege of working in our schools and with our young people and our students are the same artists who will showcase in some way in the galleries. And it's not separate, it's part of, you know, the Queens Museum. You know, we pride ourselves on centering education at the heart of everything that we do. And this idea of learning, both formally and informally, we are this beautiful melting pot, and we embrace that. And while we are executing education programs, we're also learning. So this whole process has been a learning. And so with regards to the art and social justice camps, we are also developing a young leaders Art and Social Justice Institute. And what that is going to do is dig even deeper roots in a beautiful museum setting, right? So young people want to learn about art, they want to talk about art, they want to make art, but they also want to understand how it connects with other topics, right? And they want to understand how it connects with social justice issues. So we're working towards creating a brave space that will provide series of leadership workshops, community service projects, education seminars, art making classes, all embedded in social justice, civic engagement, and activism for teens. Keeping art at the center of it, it's the glue. It's why a lot of young people love hanging out here sometimes more than they do at home, because it's the common theme that brings them all together. But what keeps them here is the sense of community. It's the sense of learning. It's the sense of co-learning, because they bring so much to the museum as well. So that is a way that we are just building going forward. We're always going to have camps. We're always going to have certain programs, but it's rethinking how we structure them. It's rethinking who we invite to them. It's rethinking what's the content, what's the curriculum, how is it developed? And we're doing that as a museum. It's not just the education department. It's definitely including all the different voices, and it's definitely including who the programs are for. So we had young people ask us, you know, what are ways that you can support us? And we answered in ways that we felt would be the best way to support them. And in turn, it's been a very cyclical moment of healing and learning together and growing together in community. And that's how we plan to hopefully, you know, do education programs going forward as a team, as a community, really building on this idea of learning together. And so that is just a little bit about how we've been working, and I think it really translates with how we've also been working with our community partners. So I would love to pass it on to my colleague, Catherine.
And Catherine, I just want to ask that if you could speak a little bit, because like, it's hard managing lots of different relationships. And I don't want people to think that we're all just like tootling along and having a really easy time of it. It's a very difficult and challenging work that we're doing. And we've had some really tough conversations, you know, amongst ourselves, with each other, with our communities, because we're bound to make mistakes and we're bound to kind of trip ourselves up. But Catherine, you have the responsibility really of managing a lot of relationships with stakeholders, with community partners for whom art is not a priority. It's not the main reason that they work with the museum. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that and how, you know, this whole process is about us trying to become more strategic about this, but like what that's been like for you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Sally, and thank you, Julian Kimaada, for sharing such beautiful insights into your work. Before I answer your question, Sally, I want to give like a little bit of background to our work with community partners, just so like the audience here can understand. I think the museum has been really invested, especially hyper locally in Central Queens for many years. We've had community organizers on staff for more than 10 years. And provided multilingual programming for those communities and services for those communities for many, many years. And often the strategy was also bringing programming to the communities. One of the really incredible like shifts and opportunities we all decided to invest in with the Year of Uncertainty is that while we've always kind of leveraged our like kind of more material and spatial resources to support community, is to really be able to provide some funding for community partners and to expand our reach beyond the hyperlocal areas of Queens, our immediate neighborhoods, and reach communities in other boroughs, parts of the borough that we haven't historically connected with. So that was like a very conscious decision going into this project, that we want to, you know, work with community partners in the Rockaways, in Jamaica, in Astoria, in other areas that we haven't been working with. And we put out an open call and ultimately selected 9 community partners, which is a very large number. So the cohort for the Year of Uncertainty is 6 artists in residence, 9 community partners, and 12 co-thinkers. And the co-thinkers are kind of more established practitioners who have been kind of acting as mentors to us, to everyone in the cohort in this learning process. But very quickly, I just want to introduce these incredible groups and who they are, and then go a little bit more into the case-by-case examples of how we're working with these groups and the challenges we're facing. So very quickly, these 9 groups are Bordeando, who's from Elmhurst, Corona. It's a women-led community textile arts collective that use traditional textile arts to create this kind of community building healing space. Secondly, we're working with Caribbean Equality Project. They're from Richmond Hill. It's a Caribbean LGBTQ rights advocacy that's like deeply rooted in civic participation and policy work. And then we are partnered with Colectivo Intercultural Transgrediendo, which is a trans-led health and service organization advocating for Latinx trans community that kind of lives at the intersection of rights for immigrants and sex workers. They're based in Jackson Heights. Their former founder and leader, Lorena Borjas, passed away at the beginning of the pandemic, and like the kind of grief and survival of this organization has been really at the crux of our work with them as well. Then we're working with Guardians of Flushing Bay. They're based in Flushing Bay. It's a tiny but really powerful organization of human-powered boaters that through their passion for dragon boating in the bay have become this incredibly forceful, powerful activist community fighting for environmental justice in one of the most polluted bodies of water of New York City, which is Flushing Bay and Creek. Then we're working with LifeCamp from Jamaica, Queens. It's a gun violence prevention and trauma intervention organization that centers their work in healing and kind of principles of peace. And youth-centered work is very much at the core of what they do. We're working with another organization called Malika was founded and is kind of based in Astoria. That's a POC and female gender expansive-led community group working towards women's empowerment and healing, specifically rooted in the kind of experience of Muslim women. Then we have Minkwon Center for Community Action in Flushing. They've been active for more than 30 years advocating for Korean, Chinese, and Asian American community, specifically around immigrant rights, housing rights, and civic participation. And then we have Rockaway Development and Revitalization Corporation from Rockaway. Specifically, we're partnering with their youth programs, which is like very much like centered in media arts and in these principles of providing space for the youth to tell their stories and centering their voices in developing solutions to the challenges that the Rockaway community faces as one of the most segregated, under-resourced, and at-risk community in terms of climate justice in Queens. And finally, this is a very long list. Thank you for bearing with me, but I just want to show the breadth and the incredible work that's happening in the borough and how urgent all of it is. The last of these 9 community partners is Saki for South Asian Women, which is a survivor-led movement against gender violence in South Asian communities. And their work is rooted in services, advocacy, community building, and organizing. And I think those 4 principles really apply to all of the groups. And even though their work isn't centered in the arts, I feel like our work also often is centered in this idea of service, advocacy, community building, and organizing. And those principles have felt really core to the Queens Museum's work for a long time. So we've invited these groups into a year-long process with us, affording them a budget to work with and develop really in collaboration through this process, develop either a project or a program or whatever seems relevant and useful to them in terms of allocating those funds. And at the same time, working closely with us in this learning process of how the museum is relevant to them. So that's resulted in a really wide range of projects and experiences and exhibitions. Yeah, and a lot of different voices. And I think let's talk about some of the challenges. So I think each of the projects is incredibly valuable and requires a lot of attention, and support. Yeah, and I think maybe I'll go into some of the learnings first. So some of the learnings that have come from that is of how the museum can be relevant to them is looking at the museum as a space, not just for public display and performance, but also as a kind of healing space and a gathering space. So one of the requests that we really have received from many of the groups is like space to meet intimately, not public facing. So often it's like after hours or on a day the museum is closed, and really like taking time for building those relationships and building that trust. And as you can kind of imagine from the types of work that many of these community groups do, like a lot of these communities are extremely vulnerable. And like there is, still a really big hurdle between them feeling welcome and invited into a big public institution like the Queen's Museum that has a very imposing building. And there's just so much trauma and pain from past experiences that, require a lot of time to repair. And like, how do we welcome trans communities into our space is like a big question, and working with these communities to navigate those relationships and take the time and the steps and learn what the steps are to invite that process has been really incredible. And that's kind of a lot of the work that's happening right now is not visible because this is the work. It's really intimate, like trust and relationship building. And we've actually been hosting a lot of healing circles. So one of the dominant requests from our community partners is space for healing circles, for intimate gathering with their own, vulnerable community members. And that's not the work we're kind of advertising publicly. And that's not really visible, but I think that's been really like a biggest source of our learning and our relationship building. And then another kind of challenge, and like a lot of the challenges are opportunities, and while they can be challenging, painful at this time, I think they're worthwhile. So like another example of that is two of the community partners we've invited in are only Spanish speaking. So for the entirety of the Year of Uncertainty program, we've had to learn how to host a truly cross-lingual space and center language justice. And that's been a big learning curve also for everyone involved. What does it mean to decenter English and suddenly not, be in a space where your own language is always prioritized and it's just a given, and really having to learn how to slow down to enable a cross-language space, and also then like reap the rewards of like hearing these voices that you usually don't hear in the conversation because a platform has been generated for them to be heard and to truly participate. So that's been another challenge and also incredible learning opportunity. And then I think another big issue that a lot of the community partners are invested in and what is relevant to them in terms of the museum is visibility and representation. And that's been an incredible process that Julian also was closely involved in, working with Life Camp. They were really eager to work with the artists and center and really experiment and go for it and like create these community artworks, which is not the type of work they've typically been doing, but they just were ready to rise to that occasion and wanted their work to be centered in the main galleries of the museum, and like affording that space and giving that space for that representation, I think has been, just a really powerful experience for those involved. And if you visit the museum, you'll just see their bright orange installation, which, yeah, is incredible.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, Catherine. And I was thinking, Julian, for you, because this is a pretty unusual experience to ask an artist to participate in, this kind of being a part of the museum for more than just like for more time, to be present in more conversations, but also to be making in public. I know we've discussed this a lot, the difficulty of that. And I think we've all been learning a lot around like how and whether that is possible and in what ways it's possible, etc. I just wondered if you could talk a bit to like what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, the question being making our process more public and in conjunction with,
yeah, like as an artist being invited not only to just have a show, but to really be a part of growing something. And then, you know, we had ideally wanted to make that whole process visible, but that's been a real struggle, I think, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think I think working in your studio, making something and then putting it up for an exhibition is a hard enough process.
Yeah.
And then if you, but here in like sort of what we're learning in this sort of this, I don't like work in progress or stuff like that, but I will say that this exhibition and this entire process is growing, right? It's constantly being added to, it's constantly being developed because of where we're at. I was thinking the other day of this very thin membrane between the studio and then what's seen in the galleries, and how I'm being challenged in how to bring the public into that experience. And because sometimes you want to sort of figure everything out and then invite the folks in. This opportunity has given us a chance to really create alongside. So like, for example, leading up to what we have in the galleries now, I met with Life Camp a few different times, right? And we talked about what they do. We talked about what they're sort of like thinking about to put up for the exhibition. And me, myself, I was there in a sense of saying like, okay, like conceptually, how do you sort of wrap around who you are as an institution, as an organization, and put that in there, right? So like meeting with easily 12 to 18 young people, high school, college age young people, and they were like, we have this idea, we want to do this. And I was like, okay, let's bring it in, let's like talk about it, because everything is good, right? But like what's actually feasible. And now we are hopefully sort of like moving into a phase where we get to sort of sit down together in the sort of spaces that we've created and talk about where our concerns and our ideas overlap, right? Like you said, Life Camp are trauma responders, violence interrupters, right? They're doing vital work in South Jamaica, right? And then I'm over here thinking about a future without police and prisons, right? And those two things are obviously very closely tied, but the way that we go about them is very different. Joining these like sort of two minds in the same space I mean, I haven't really experienced something like this. Like if you go and see the exhibition, Sally and I talked about this. They have a mural on one of the walls, right? And my sort of large scale drawings are like a few feet down. And looking at it, I'm like, here you have, if you didn't know any difference, maybe they're like the same thing or even like the same artist. But when I look at it, I see this mural painted by someone in the Life Camp community that is almost in something that you would see in South Jamaica or Brooklyn or Harlem, that was painted in memory of someone or memory of a future. And here, a few feet down, you have my sort of transcriptive drawings that are talking about past and future ideas of the carceral state, right? There's not a lot of this, that doesn't really happen by accident in a lot of different sort of scenarios, but like here we are. I think another challenge, and Catherine and Kimaada can also speak to this, these organizations are doing vital work, but that also means that the turnover in the organizations is something that happens, right? And so one of the people that we sort of got really close to and really sort of dependent on, now they moved on and they're doing something else, and someone else who is working with them is being promoted, and we're like, you know, there's just fundamental like feet on the ground, like coordination stuff that also like makes this difficult. But I think visually and conceptually what's happening is very interesting, and I hope that all these relationships continue and really get developed, and we can hold the institution at large to a higher standard because we've sort of opened up the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's true. I remember standing with you, scratching my head, looking at it and going, what is this? Like, what is this? Like, it doesn't fall into any exhibitionary practice that we're familiar with, and it challenges all of the assumptions and expectations you have of what should and could be in a gallery, which is really great and exciting. But then what do we do? And so now what do we do? And I think it's right. I think what you say about sitting, I'd love it. I think we should do this. I think we should sit in the space and and talk amongst the work together, all of us, and work out what we're doing with the next few months, because we have the time. Anyway, sorry, we're having a meeting, everybody. I wondered if I know Brian wanted me to open up to questions. Oh, there you go. Now is a good time for anyone in the audience to ask questions. Well, this is a really long one.
Yeah, I can read it out to you guys.
Or maybe the person could jump in and ask it. No.
Yeah, I can just read it out to you guys. It's also from someone you know, Clifford.
Oh,
so also, you know, I mean, I could have mentioned in my introduction that also the MA Curatorial Practice department is very thankful to the Queen's Museum for mentoring around 7 of our students last summer.
They were amazing. So, it was wonderful to have everyone as part of the community that we have here.
Yeah. Well, so Clifford, who was one of those students, would like to ask, while common understandings of community like geographical locale and demographic factors continue to prevail, these labels will serve us less and less as we detach ourselves from our physical identities to a more digital one. Case in point, we're witnessing the emergence of micro-communities and collective networks formed based on new fluid group identities and representational forms. Does this evolving nature of community apply to Queen's Museum? If so, how does Queen's Museum keep up and play a part in supporting these new communities, in brackets, of tomorrow?
I want to say something and pass it over immediately, but thank you for the question. The other thing to note is that there's a big digital divide in our communities, and not everybody has access to the internet or is able to have a digital life. So I think we're very aware of that. And just as Catherine mentioned, we've had to think a lot about language justice, and I would add access to that. We've also been really aware that not everyone can just shift to digital in the way that we're doing today. And so we want to always remember to give people points of entry and contact on their terms and in the way that they need. So for some people, visiting the museum is really important. Having said that, I think we've learned a lot, all of us, about how to use these digital spaces better. None of us could do Zoom before. None of us, I don't plan to go to big conferences now. I just will do a digital presentation. But I really love the idea of smaller, more intimate gatherings like micro programming, where it's important to gather together as humans and actually have those conversations, because it's so different having them in person. So I think my answer would be that we need to do both, but I think I'll pass to Kimaada actually, because the challenges of this, particularly in the light of education, are really real.
Yes, thank you. No, that is very true, and as Sally mentioned, there's a huge digital divide in our community, especially our local community. I mean, when we had to pivot, the word of 2020, to a digital space, it was one where we had to kind of take a step back, just working with our school partners, because they were themselves having, problems with supplying the resources that their students needed, much less like us coming and asking how we can support that. So it was this idea of, yes, coming up with ways digitally, but still finding concrete ways to get paper and supplies in hand to different, communities. So the way that that's evolving, even though it's a year plus later, we still have to take into consideration that not everyone has the same resources, and obviously also not everyone learns the same way, right? And that's something at the center of the work that we do. And when we're talking about access, when we're talking about language justice, if we create a worksheet, if we create some type of content, we're always looking to find ways how we can translate that and then take it the next step further. How can we provide it in a way that is accessible to all? That's something that we're working with. That's a huge at the center of the work that we do at the museum. And I just want to pass it on to Catherine as well, because just to chime in there, because she's also part of those conversations around access and what we're doing at the museum.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still like trying to take in the question, really reflect. I don't feel like I don't have a clear answer to it, but what I can say is that while I agree with you, especially, within the younger generation, and we're working with a lot of young people in the year of uncertainty, even though things are fluid and changing, I think identity and identifying as part of certain things and norms and values is stronger than ever, actually. And I think language preservation, language justice, cultural ways of identifying class, race, those things very much, disability, certain fights for rights for certain groups is very much forefront and center in what I see being really important to our community partners. I think you're right that things are not kind of framed in traditional ways anymore, but that identification process allows for much broader forms of solidarity across groups as well. But I think they remain really vital and important.
Could I say one little word? Hi. I'm Tula Giannini from Pratt Institute, and I did it's on now. I introduced a degree, Museums and Digital Culture, and this is my big area of my focus. And I think that there's actually a global thread to our themes now that also bring in the popular culture. And that's very much a part of young people's lives, of everybody's life. So there are a lot of themes. I was in Paris at a meeting at the Musée de Quai Branly, and it just happened that was the day that Macron met with the president of Benin. And I was looking at two amazing Benin sculptors, and that was the day they decided they were going to go back to Benin. And these themes are really become global, and the communication. And then the other thing I think is really important to understand is the human digital behavior, because young people, their lives are so involved with digital communication and interaction that it's changing, as Catherine Grau pointed out, this sense of identity, how we communicate and what we think about. So it's the challenge of bringing these, to integrating these two, the physical and in a sense the virtual worlds, and you pointed this out in your presentation, how challenging that becomes. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Tula. I think we're almost out of time, so I think I'll just I think I'll take a last question here, which is actually very kind of simple or deceptively complicated, which is from Lisa Bresnak, and it is the question is, what are the next 2 phases?
Can you do it, Catherine? Because
Yes,
I always get the words wrong.
Definitely,
Yeah,
I can jump in. So these 3 phases are the 3 phases of kind of what we're calling the public facing part of the year of uncertainty, which is really only just one part. That we've been working together with the cohort since early March. Internally, we've been working on it much longer. Conversations will certainly extend much beyond this year. But the public facing phase, which means that all of our galleries are turned over to the Year of Uncertainty projects and exhibitions and programming, has these 3 phases. And October is the participate and build phase, where things are on view. If you come to the museum now, you'll see a lot of content and projects, and many of them are participatory and inviting you to help generate content and answer questions and engage with the questions that the work is posing. The second phase is called Engage and Experience. It's November through the end of December, where more of that process will kind of become visible. And if you do come and participate in some of the participatory works, like your voice will be included in some of the actual works. So we're really inviting that kind of public engagement and for you to visit the galleries if you can. And then the final phase is for the month of January. That phase is called Synthesize and Reflect. And, we're working towards more discursive public programming, especially in that phase, to really bring those conversations. And I love Julian's suggestion, like bring those conversations together and really question more publicly what is happening. And as you can probably tell from this presentation, the project is so big, and actually communicating the project and all the components that are happening within it and reflecting on them is a massive undertaking. And we'll begin that process in January, and we'll invite you into that process in January. But it's gonna take a lot to really unpack all of the learning and all of these incredible experiences and challenging questions that we will continue to ask ourselves.
And we have a Year of Uncertainty website where we'll be hosting content, and there'll be a lot of writing and things appearing in different forms that we really love your feedback on and engagement with.
Great, thank you so much, guys. I'll just maybe pull up that link back in there for you. So for the website, and unless there are any other pressing, burning concerns or statements, Catherine, Julian, Sally, Kimaada, thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you.
Maybe we can should we unmute and do a little bit of...
Come and see us, come to the museum. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much for this invitation.